Everyone said my stepbrother was the golden child. But when I discovered what he buried in the woods behind our house, I realized why he was so protected. My name is Emily, I'm 30 years old, and this is my story. I need you to understand something before I tell you what I found that day. My stepbrother Marcus wasn't just favored. He was worshipped. From the moment my mother married his father when I was 12 and Marcus was 14, it became crystal clear that I would always be second best in our newly blended family. Marcus could do no wrong. When he came home with a C+ on his report card, my stepfather Richard would pat his shoulder and say, "Math has always been challenging, son. You'll get it next time." When I brought home straight A's, I'd get a distracted nod and maybe a "that's nice, Emily," if I was lucky. When Marcus crashed Richard's car at 17, it was an accident that could happen to anyone. When I accidentally broke my mother's favorite vase the same year, I was grounded for 2 weeks and had to pay for a replacement with my part-time job money. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was stronger for it. I buried my resentment so deep that sometimes I even convinced myself I was okay with being invisible. But resentment has a way of growing in the dark, doesn't it? Like a poisonous vine, wrapping itself around your heart until you can barely breathe. The day everything changed was a Tuesday in October. I was home from college for fall break, visiting the house I'd grown up in but never truly belonged to. Marcus was 28 then, still living at home despite having graduated from an expensive private university that Richard had paid for in full. I'd worked 3 jobs to put myself through community college, but that's a story for another time. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I overheard Richard on the phone in his study. The door was cracked, and his voice carried that particular tone he used when discussing money. Sharp, controlled, serious. "The transfer needs to happen before the end of the month," he was saying. "Yes, all of it. Marcus needs to understand that this is his responsibility now." My hand froze on the coffee pot. Transfer? What transfer? I know it's a lot of money, but he's proven himself. Unlike... Richard's voice lowered, and I strained to hear. "Well, let's just say Emily has made it clear where her loyalties lie." My heart hammered against my ribs. What did that mean? What had I done to prove disloyalty? I'd spent years trying to earn just a fraction of the love and acceptance they showered on Marcus, and I'd failed at every turn. I heard Richard's chair creak as he stood up, and I quickly busied myself with the coffee, mind racing. When he emerged from the study, he gave me that same polite smile he'd been giving me for 18 years, the smile that said I was a guest in his house, not his daughter. "Morning, Emily. Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." The words came out automatically, trained into me after years of polite small talk. "Marcus is still sleeping, I'm sure. That boy could sleep through an earthquake." He chuckled fondly, the way he never chuckled about anything I did. I watched him pour his coffee, noting the way his hands shook slightly. Richard was 62 now, and showing his age more each time I saw him. His hair had gone completely gray, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when he married my mother. "Richard," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "Can I ask you something?" He paused, cup halfway to his lips. "Of course." "That phone call just now, is everything okay? You sounded worried." For just a moment, his composed mask slipped. I saw something flicker across his face, fear? Guilt? But it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. "Just business, Emily. Nothing for you to worry about. Nothing for me to worry about." The story of my life, summarized in 6 words. I spent the rest of the morning in a fog, Richard's words echoing in my head. Unlike Emily, what had I done? What loyalties was he talking about? I'd never given him any reason to doubt me. If anything, I'd spent my entire teenage years trying desperately to win his approval. Around noon, Marcus finally emerged from his room, hair tousled, wearing the same clothes he'd had on yesterday. At 28, he still looked like the golden boy he'd always been. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to doubt your place in the world. "Hey, sis," he said, ruffling my hair as he passed. I was 30 years old, but he still treated me like I was 12. "Hey, Marcus." I watched him move around the kitchen with the casual ownership of someone who'd never questioned whether they belonged. Late night. He shrugged, grabbing juice from the fridge. Met up with some friends. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. I'd never had the luxury of staying out late without consequences, never had friends I could just meet up with on a whim. But I nodded anyway. Listen, Marcus said, suddenly serious. I'm glad you're here. There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. My pulse quickened. Was this about the transfer Richard had mentioned? What's up? Marcus glanced around, then moved closer, lowering his voice. It's about Dad's will. Dad. He'd called Richard Dad from day one, while I'd never been able to manage more than his first name. Even now, the easy intimacy of it stung. What about it? You should know. Things are going to be different than you might expect. Dad's been thinking about the future, about what happens to the business, the house, everything. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Different how? Marcus reached out and touched my arm, his expression almost pitying. Emily, you have to understand. You've made choices that have disappointed him. The way you've distanced yourself from the family, chosen your own path instead of. Instead of what? The words came out sharper than I intended. Instead of living at home until I'm 30, instead of letting him pay for everything. That's not fair. Marcus's voice took on that wounded tone he'd perfected as a teenager, the one that always made adults rush to comfort him. I've been helping with the business, learning from Dad, proving that I can handle responsibility. You've been pursuing your independence. The way he said independence made it sound like a dirty word. So, what are you telling me, Marcus? That I'm being written out of the will? Not written out, he said quickly. But priorities have shifted. You have your career, your apartment in the city. You've made it clear you don't need family. I stared at him, this man who'd shared a house with me for 6 years, but had never truly seen me. I don't need family? Marcus, I've spent 18 years trying to be part of this family. The only reason I moved to the city was because I finally accepted that I never would be. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Look, I'm just trying to give you a heads up. Maybe if you talk to Dad, explain that you want to be more involved. More involved in what? The business. The family. Show him that you're committed to. To what, Marcus? To staying small? To never questioning anything? To accepting whatever crumbs he decides to throw my way? Marcus's face hardened. Dad has given you everything, Emily. A home, an education, opportunities you never would have had if he hadn't married your mother. Maybe a little gratitude wouldn't go amiss. There it was. The truth he'd been too polite to say for 18 years. I wasn't his sister. I was a charity case, someone to be tolerated out of obligation to my mother. I turned and walked away before I said something I'd regret. But as I headed upstairs, I heard Marcus make a phone call. Yeah, it's me, he said quietly. I talked to her. She's not going to be a problem. Not going to be a problem? I paused on the stairs, blood rushing in my ears. Trust me, Marcus continued. Emily doesn't have the stomach for a fight. She'll accept whatever Dad decides and move on. She always does. That conversation haunted me for the rest of the day. Not going to be a problem. She always does. The casual dismissal in Marcus's voice, the certainty that I would simply roll over and accept whatever they decided about my future, it lit a fire in me that I'd been stamping out for years. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about my mother, wondering what she would say if she knew how completely I'd been written out of the family narrative. Mom had died 3 years ago after a sudden heart attack, and I grieved not just for her loss, but for the loss of the only person who'd ever truly seen me as belonging. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and decided to take a walk. The October air was crisp and clear, and I needed to clear my head. I slipped out of the house quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. Our property backed up to a small patch of woods. Nothing dramatic, just a few acres of oak and maple trees that provided privacy from the neighbors. As kids, Marcus and I had played there sometimes, though he'd usually ditch me for his friends after a few minutes. I was walking the familiar path when I saw the light. It was just a flicker at first, barely visible through the trees. My first thought was that someone was camping illegally on our property. But as I got closer, I realized the light was coming from deeper in the woods, from a section I rarely visited. I should have turned back. Every instinct told me to go home, mind my own business, be the good girl who never caused trouble. But something, maybe it was the anger still burning from Marcus's phone call, maybe it was 18 years of being told I didn't belong, made me push forward. The light was coming from a flashlight, and the person holding it was Marcus. I crouched behind a large oak tree, heart pounding. What was my stepbrother doing in the woods at 2 a.m? He was kneeling next to a large hole in the ground, the beam of his flashlight illuminating what looked like a metal box. I watched, frozen, as Marcus carefully lowered the box into the hole and began covering it with dirt. His movements were methodical, practiced, like he'd done this before. When he was finished, he scattered leaves over the disturbed earth and stepped back to examine his work. Only then did I notice what he was wearing. Dark clothes, boots, and gloves. This wasn't a spontaneous, midnight activity. This was planned. Marcus gathered his things and started back toward the house. I pressed myself against the tree, barely breathing, as he passed within 20 feet of my hiding spot. I waited until I was sure he was gone before emerging from behind the oak. The burial spot was well hidden. If I hadn't seen him in the act, I would have walked right past it. But now, kneeling where Marcus had knelt, I could see the faint outline where the earth had been disturbed. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the same impulse that had driven me to pursue a career in journalism despite Richard's disapproval. Maybe it was the investigative instincts that had served me well in my work. Or maybe I was just tired of being treated like I was too stupid or weak to handle the truth. I started digging with my hands. The dirt was soft, recently turned, and it didn't take long to reach the metal box. It was smaller than I'd expected, about the size of a shoebox, with a simple latch. My hands shook as I lifted it from the hole. Inside were documents. Lots of them. Bank statements showing transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Legal documents with signatures I didn't recognize. But it was the photographs that made my blood run cold. They were surveillance photos, taken with a telephoto lens. Pictures of me coming and going from my apartment in the city. Pictures of me at work at the coffee shop I frequented, talking to my neighbors. Someone had been watching me for months, maybe years. But the worst part wasn't the invasion of privacy. The worst part was the notation written on the back of several photos in handwriting I recognized as Richard's. Insurance. Yeah, maintaining distance, as expected. Insurance? What did that mean? I kept digging through the documents, my panic growing with each page. There were detailed financial records showing that Richard's company was in serious trouble, debt, lawsuits, criminal investigations. And there was something else. A life insurance policy. On me. $2 million. Beneficiary. Marcus Richardson. I'd never signed any life insurance policy. I'd certainly never named Marcus as my beneficiary. But according to the documentation in this box, the policy had been active for 3 years, since just before my mother died. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the papers. What was this? Why did Marcus have surveillance photos of me? Why was there a life insurance policy I'd never signed? And then I found the file that answered all my questions and shattered my world completely. It was a medical examiner's report about my mother's death. According to the official report I'd been given at the time, my mother had died of a sudden heart attack. Natural causes. Tragic, but not suspicious. But this report, the real one, apparently, told a different story. The words blurred as I read them. Digitalis poisoning. Administered over time. Meant to mimic heart failure. My mother had been murdered. I sat in the dirt, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy I couldn't fully understand, holding proof that my mother's death hadn't been natural. And Marcus knew. Richard knew. They'd all known, and they'd let me grieve and blame myself for not being there when she died.
But why?
Why kill my mother? What could they possibly gain from the inheritance? Of course. My mother had inherited a substantial amount from her parents, money that would have gone to me when she died. But if I died before claiming it, if something happened to me before I could contest Richard's control over the estate, I thought about the phone call I'd overheard that morning. The transfer. All of it. Marcus needed to understand that this was his responsibility now. They weren't just planning to write me out of the will. They were planning to make sure I couldn't contest it. Because they were planning to kill me. I shoved the documents back into the box with shaking hands. I had to get out of here. I had to get somewhere safe and figure out what to do with this information. But first, I had to put everything back exactly as I'd found it. If Marcus realized someone had discovered his hiding place. As I refilled the hole, my mind raced. How long had they been planning this? Had they been waiting for the right opportunity, or was there a timeline I didn't know about? The surveillance photos suggested they'd been watching my routines, learning my patterns. I scattered the leaves back over the disturbed earth, trying to make it look undisturbed. My hands were filthy, my clothes covered in dirt, but I didn't care. I needed to get back to the house, pack my things, and leave before anyone realized what I'd discovered. But as I turned to head back, I heard footsteps. Someone was coming through the woods, moving slowly, but deliberately toward my location. I dove behind the same oak tree I'd hidden behind earlier, pressing myself against the rough bark and praying I was invisible. The footsteps stopped right where I'd been digging. Well. Marcus's voice cut through the darkness, like a blade. I pressed myself harder against the tree, not daring to breathe. Someone's been digging where they shouldn't be digging. I heard him moving around, probably examining the site. My heart was beating so loud I was sure he could hear it. Had I covered the hole well enough? Had I left any evidence that someone had been there? Sloppy, Marcus. Very sloppy. A second voice made my blood freeze. Richard. They were both here. I told you this location wasn't secure enough, Richard continued. Too close to the house. Too accessible. It's been fine for 3 years, Marcus replied, but I could hear the tension in his voice. No one comes back here. Clearly someone does. There was a long pause. I could hear them moving around, probably searching for signs of who had been there. The hole's been opened, Richard said finally. Recently. Tonight, I'd guess. That's impossible. I was just here 2 hours ago, and everything was… And where's Emily? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. My mouth went completely dry. She's asleep, Marcus said, but he sounded less certain now. Are you sure about that? Another pause. Then I heard Marcus's phone beep as he checked something. Her car's still in the driveway, he said. She's in the house. Go check. Now. I heard Marcus's footsteps retreating quickly toward the house. This was my chance to escape, but Richard was still standing right next to my hiding spot. If I moved, he'd see me for sure. I know you're there, Richard said quietly. My heart stopped. Come out, Emily. We need to talk. For a moment, I considered staying hidden. Maybe he was bluffing. Maybe he didn't actually know I was there. But then he spoke again, and his voice held the same cold authority that had commanded our household for 18 years. If you don't come out voluntarily, this will be much worse for you. You have 5 seconds. I stepped out from behind the tree. Richard was standing exactly where I'd buried the box, his arms crossed, looking more disappointed than surprised. In the moonlight, his face looked older, harder than I'd ever seen it. Hello, Emily. Richard. My voice came out as barely a whisper. Find anything interesting in my son's cache? There was no point in lying. You killed her. Richard tilted his head slightly. Killed who? My mother. You poisoned her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he sighed, the sound of a man who is tired of carrying secrets. Your mother was going to leave me, he said finally. Did you know that? I stared at him. What? She found out about some financial irregularities in my business. She was threatening to go to the authorities. She was going to take her money, take you, and leave. She was going to destroy everything I'd built. So you murdered her. I protected my family. His voice hardened. Everything I did was to protect Marcus, to protect our future. Your mother was going to ruin that. She was my family too. No, Emily. You were never family. You were a complication that came with your mother. A loose end that needed to be managed. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. 18 years of feeling like an outsider, and now I knew why. I had never been intended to be part of this family. I had been a problem to be solved. The insurance policy, I said. You are going to kill me too. Richard's expression didn't change. You've been a problem for a long time, Emily. Always asking questions, always pushing boundaries. When you moved to the city, I thought distance might be enough. But lately what? Lately you've been digging into things that don't concern you. Your journalism career, your contacts at the newspaper. Did you really think I didn't know about your investigation into my business? My blood ran cold. I had been working on a story about financial fraud in construction companies. It was supposed to be a general piece, but some of the patterns I'd uncovered, they could have led back to Richard's company. You've been watching me for your own protection, he said, as if surveillance was a kindness. I kept hoping you'd let sleeping dogs lie. But you've always been too much like your mother. Too curious. Too self-righteous. I heard footsteps crashing through the woods. Marcus was coming back, and he sounded panicked.
Dad.
She's not in the house. Her bed hasn't been slept in, and Marcus burst into the clearing and stopped short when he saw me standing there.
Oh.
Hello, Marcus, I said. He looked between me and Richard, his face pale in the moonlight. How much does she know? Everything, Richard replied. She found your hiding place. Marcus cursed under his breath. I told you we should have moved it after the last time. The last time? I looked between them. You've done this before? Neither of them answered, but the silence told me everything I needed to know. They had done this before. Other people had discovered their secrets, and those people had, what? Disappeared? Died in convenient accidents? What now? Marcus asked. Richard studied me for a long moment. Now we have a problem that needs to be solved tonight. You can't just make me disappear, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. People will ask questions. I have friends, co-workers. You have no one, Richard said flatly. You've spent years isolating yourself, pushing people away, building a solitary life in the city. When you disappear, people will assume you finally decided to start over somewhere new. Very sad, but not surprising for someone who never quite fit in anywhere. The horrible truth was that he was right. I had isolated myself. After years of trying and failing to find my place in his family, I'd stopped trying to find my place anywhere. I had colleagues, but not close friends. I had acquaintances, but no one who would really miss me. What about my job? You've been talking about freelance work, haven't you? About traveling? It won't be hard to believe you decided to pursue that dream. Richard spoke like he'd already worked out all the details. Marcus will handle your apartment, your belongings. A few carefully worded emails to your editor about needing time to find yourself, and everyone will understand why Emily Matthews just faded away. I realized with growing horror that they had been planning this for a while. The surveillance, the life insurance policy, the careful documentation of my habits and routines, it was all preparation for making me disappear without a trace. Please, I said, hating the desperation in my voice. I won't tell anyone what I found. I'll leave town. I'll never contact you again. You'll never see me. Emily. Richard's voice was almost gentle. You know I can't do that. You know too much. And more importantly, you'll never stop digging. It's who you are. He was right about that too. Even if I promised to stay quiet, I would never be able to let my mother's murder go unsolved. I would spend the rest of my life trying to expose them, trying to get justice for her. Marcus stepped closer, and I saw something in his hand. A syringe. This will be quick, he said, almost apologetically. Just like with your mother. You'll go to sleep, and then, well, then it will look like you had the same heart condition she did. Genetic predisposition. Very tragic. I backed away, but Richard was behind me, blocking my escape. The woods suddenly felt very small, very isolated. Wait, I said desperately. The box. Other people know about it. Richard raised an eyebrow. Do they? I called someone. Before I came out here. Told them about the hiding place. If something happens to me, Emily. Marcus's voice was patient, like he was explaining something to a child. Your phone is in your room. I checked. You haven't called anyone. Of course. They had thought of everything. But there's something you haven't thought of, I said. What's that? Richard asked. I took a deep breath, buying time, trying to think of anything that might save me. The real medical examiner's report. The one about my mother. How did you get it? Richard and Marcus exchanged a look. Someone had to falsify the original report, I continued. Someone had to be paid off. Someone else knows what you did. That's been handled, Richard said dismissively. Has it? Because 3 years is a long time to keep a secret like that. People get guilty consciences. People want more money. People talk. I saw uncertainty flicker across Marcus's face. Dad, it's fine, Richard snapped. Dr. Hendricks isn't a problem. Dr. Hendricks. I filed the name away, though I wasn't sure how much good it would do me now. And what about your business partner? I pressed, grasping at straws. The one you've been embezzling from? How long before he figures out where the money went? This time, the look that passed between them was more significant. You really have been investigating, Richard said slowly. I'm a journalist. It's what I do. Not anymore, Marcus said, stepping forward with a syringe. I had nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. But as Marcus reached for me, I heard something that changed everything. Sirens. Police sirens, getting closer. Richard and Marcus froze, listening to the approaching sound. That's impossible, Marcus whispered. Unless, Richard said slowly, looking at me with something that might have been respect, our little journalist was more prepared than we thought. I didn't call anyone, I said truthfully. I swear I didn't call the police. But even as I said it, I was praying that whoever had called them would arrive before Marcus could use that syringe. The sirens were getting closer, definitely heading toward our property. Richard grabbed Marcus's arm. Hide the box. Now. There's no time. Do it. Marcus shoved the metal box back into the hole and hastily kicked dirt over it while Richard grabbed my arm. If you say one word about what you found here, I will make sure you disappear in a way that involves considerably more suffering, he hissed in my ear. Do you understand me? I nodded, too terrified to speak. Dad, Marcus said urgently. What do we tell them? We tell them that Emily couldn't sleep and went for a walk. We heard her call for help and came looking for her. She got turned around in the dark and was scared. It was a plausible story. Simple. Nothing suspicious about a family helping a lost relative. The siren stopped, but I could see flashlight beams dancing through the trees as the police made their way toward us. Over here, Richard called out. We found her. 3 officers emerged from the woods, led by a tall woman with graying hair and sharp eyes. Her badge identified her as Sergeant Martinez. Everyone okay here? She asked, her gaze moving between the 3 of us. Yes, thank goodness, Richard said, slipping into his concerned stepfather role with practiced ease. Emily here went for a late-night walk and got disoriented. We heard her calling for help. Sergeant Martinez looked at me. Is that right, miss? I opened my mouth, Richard's threat echoing in my ears. One word about what I'd found, and I would disappear in a way that involved considerably more suffering. But then I noticed something. The officer standing behind Sergeant Martinez was young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and an expression of genuine concern. And more importantly, he was holding something. A cell phone. My cell phone. Actually, he said, stepping forward. We're here because of a 911 call made from this phone about 20 minutes ago. My heart stopped. I hadn't made any 911 call. The caller identified herself as Emily Matthews, the officer continued. She said she discovered evidence of a crime and was in immediate danger. The call cut off abruptly, but we were able to track the phone's GPS to this location. Richard and Marcus both stared at me. I stared back, equally confused. I didn't make that call, I said honestly. The call came from your phone, Sergeant Martinez said. Are you saying someone else made it? I don't know. My phone was in my room when I left the house. When you left the house to go for a walk, the young officer asked. Yes. At 2:30 in the morning? I realized how that sounded. I couldn't sleep. Sergeant Martinez was studying all three of us with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen enough family drama to recognize when something wasn't right. "Mr. Richardson," she said to Richard, "is there anyone else in the house who might have access to Emily's phone?" "Just the family," Richard replied smoothly. "But I can't imagine why anyone would." "Actually," a new voice said from the trees, "I can explain that." We all turned to see a fourth person emerging from the woods. A woman in her 50s with short silver hair and a familiar face that I couldn't quite place. "Sorry I'm late," she said to Sergeant Martinez. "I wanted to make sure I had everything we needed." Richard had gone very pale. "Catherine?" "Hello, Richard." The woman's voice was cold as winter. "It's been a long time." "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "Who are you?" "Catherine Phillips," she replied. "I was your stepmother's lawyer. And her friend. And the person who's been watching this family very carefully for the past 3 years." The bottom dropped out of my world. My mother's lawyer? I remembered her now. She'd handled the reading of my mother's will, though Richard had somehow ended up controlling most of the inheritance. "Miss Phillips," Sergeant Martinez said, "you're the one who called this in?" "I called 911 from Emily's phone, yes. Emily gave me a spare key to her apartment months ago, in case of emergency. When my surveillance equipment picked up activity in these woods tonight, I knew it was time to act." "Surveillance equipment?" I repeated. Catherine looked at me with something that might have been maternal affection. "Emily, honey, did you really think your mother didn't prepare for this possibility? She knew Richard was dangerous long before she died. She just didn't act fast enough to save herself." "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, but his voice had lost its authority. He sounded scared now. "I'm talking about the evidence your mother gathered before her death. The recordings she made of your phone conversations. The financial documents she copied. The witness statements she collected from your business associates." Catherine reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that I recognized as a digital recorder. "I'm talking about the fact that Sarah Matthews knew you were planning to kill her, and she made sure that if anything happened to her, the truth would come out eventually." She pressed play, and my mother's voice filled the clearing. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm dead, and it probably means Richard killed me. I've been documenting his criminal activities for months, and I've hidden copies of everything in a place only Catherine knows about. The key to everything is in the woods behind the house, in a metal box that Marcus buries and digs up whenever they need to access it. The box contains evidence of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. My daughter Emily is in danger, and I need someone to protect her when I can't." The recording continued, my mother's voice steady and determined as she laid out everything she'd discovered about Richard's crimes, everything she'd figured out about his plans for her and for me. When it finished, the silence in the woods was absolute. Richard was staring at the recorder like it was a poisonous snake. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. "The box," Sergeant Martinez said quietly. "Where is it?" Before Richard or Marcus could answer, Catherine walked over to the spot where I'd been digging and pointed. "Right there. Freshly buried tonight, but it's been used as a hiding place for years." The young officer immediately began digging while his partner kept watch on Richard and Marcus. It didn't take long to uncover the metal box. "Don't open that," Richard said desperately. "You don't have a warrant." "We have probable cause," Sergeant Martinez replied calmly, "thanks to the 911 call and Miss Phillips's testimony." She opened the box, and even in the moonlight, I could see her expression change as she looked at the contents. "Jesus," she breathed. "Marcus Richardson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Richard Richardson, you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Matthews and conspiracy to commit additional murder." As the officers moved to handcuff them, Marcus looked at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. "Emily, I'm sorry. I never wanted." "Don't," I said. "Just don't." Richard, even with his hands cuffed behind his back, maintained his composure. "This is all circumstantial evidence. No prosecutor will." "Actually," Catherine interrupted, "we have quite a bit more than what's in that box. Your mother was very thorough, Emily. Very thorough indeed." As the police led Richard and Marcus away, I found myself alone in the woods with Catherine. The woman who had apparently been protecting me from a distance for 3 years.
How?
I asked. How did you know I was in danger tonight? I've been monitoring their communications for months, she said. When Marcus made that call this afternoon about you not being a problem, I knew they were accelerating their timeline. I've had surveillance on this property for weeks, waiting for them to access their hiding place. You could have warned me. I tried, honey. But you're stubborn, just like your mother. You would have tried to investigate on your own and gotten yourself killed. This was the only way to catch them with enough evidence to make charges stick. I looked around the woods where I'd almost died, where my mother's murderers had hidden their secrets for 3 years. What happens now? Now, Catherine said gently, you get justice for your mother, and you get your life back. The next few weeks passed in a blur of police stations, lawyers' offices, and media attention I never wanted. The arrest of Richard and Marcus Richardson for murder and conspiracy made headlines in our small town and beyond. Local business owner charged in wife's murder screamed from newspaper front pages, while local news stations replayed footage of Richard being led away in handcuffs. But for me, the media circus was secondary to the revelations that kept coming as investigators dug deeper into the evidence my mother had left behind. Catherine and I met regularly during those weeks, and each meeting brought new horrors to light. My mother hadn't just suspected Richard was planning to kill her, she'd known exactly how and when it would happen. She found the digitalis in his desk drawer, Catherine explained during one of our sessions in her law office. Hidden inside a bottle of heart medication that was prescribed for his father years ago. She photographed everything. Catherine spread the photos across her desk. Images of pill bottles, syringes, medical documents. My mother had been building a case with the thoroughness of a detective. Why didn't she just go to the police? I asked for the 100th time. She tried, Catherine said softly. She spoke to Detective Morrison at the county sheriff's office. But Richard had connections there, people who owed him favors. Morrison warned her that without more concrete evidence, any investigation would tip Richard off and make her situation more dangerous. So she decided to gather more evidence. She decided to protect you. Catherine's voice was firm. Everything she did in those final months was about making sure you would be safe after she was gone. She knew she was running out of time, but she also knew that if she disappeared suddenly, Richard would move against you immediately. She needed to create a situation where her death would look natural long enough for her real evidence to surface. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. My mother had sacrificed herself to save me, and for 3 years I'd been angry at her for leaving me alone with Richard and Marcus. She left you something, Catherine said, pulling a sealed envelope from her desk drawer. She made me promise to give this to you only after Richard was arrested. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in my mother's familiar handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before her death. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Catherine has finally been able to tell you the truth. I know you must be angry, confused, and heartbroken. I know you probably feel like I abandoned you to face Richard and Marcus alone. Please know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But I also know that you're stronger than you realize. You're braver than you think. And you're the only person I trust to see that justice is done, not just for me, but for others. Richard didn't just kill me, Emily. He's killed before. In the safety deposit box at First National Bank, key enclosed, you'll find evidence of at least 2 other murders connected to Richard's business dealings. People who got too close to the truth about his financial crimes. People who threatened to expose him. I couldn't gather enough evidence on those cases before Richard moved against me, but I know you can. I know you'll finish what I started. You've always been my greatest pride, Emily. Not because of your grades or your achievements, but because of your heart. Because you've never been able to walk away from an injustice, even when it would have been easier. Don't walk away from this one. I love you always, Mom. P.S. The real will is in the safety deposit box too. Richard forged the one that was read after my death. You're inheriting everything, sweetheart. Use it to build the life you deserve. I was crying before I finished reading. Catherine handed me tissues and waited patiently while I composed myself. There are other victims? I finally managed to ask. Your mother believed so. and the police are taking her research seriously. Over the following days, I learned just how seriously. Detective Morrison, the same detective who had dismissed my mother's concerns 3 years earlier, was now leading a task force investigating Richard's business dealings going back 15 years. They found the safety deposit box exactly where my mother said it would be. Inside were financial records, photographs, witness statements, and recorded phone conversations that painted a picture of systematic fraud, intimidation, and murder spanning more than a decade. The most damning evidence concerned a man named David Chen, a whistleblower who had tried to expose safety violations at one of Richard's construction sites. Chen had died in a car accident just days before he was scheduled to testify before a grand jury. The accident report claimed mechanical failure, but my mother had photos showing that Chen's brake lines had been cut. Then there was Margaret Foster, an accountant who had discovered Richard's embezzlement scheme. She died of an apparent drug overdose, despite having no history of drug use. My mother had tracked down Margaret's sister, who confirmed that Margaret had been receiving death threats in the weeks before her death. How many people did he kill? I asked Detective Morrison during one of my interviews. We're still investigating, she said grimly. But your mother's research suggests at least 5 victims over the past 15 years. Richard Richardson was running a criminal enterprise, and anyone who threatened it ended up dead. And Marcus. Marcus was involved in at least 3 of the murders, including the planned murder of you. He's facing multiple charges of conspiracy to commit murder. The investigation dominated my life for months. I took leave from my job to work with the police and prosecutors, helping them understand my mother's research and providing context for the evidence she'd gathered. But it was during this process that I learned the most shocking truth of all. I was meeting with the lead prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney James Walsh, when he dropped the bombshell. Emily, there's something else you need to know about your mother's death. I looked up from the documents we'd been reviewing. What? The digitalis poisoning wasn't the only thing that killed her. The medical examiner found something else in her system. My blood ran cold. What kind of something else? A very small amount of potassium chloride, injected directly into her bloodstream, probably while she was unconscious from the digitalis. I don't understand. Why use 2 different methods? Walsh's expression was grim. Because the digitalis alone might not have been fatal in the dose Richard used. Your mother was stronger than he expected, more resistant to the poison. When she didn't die as quickly as planned, Marcus injected the potassium chloride to finish the job. The room spun around me. Marcus was there when she died? We believe so. There were traces of his DNA under her fingernails, suggesting she fought back. The original medical examiner missed it because Richard had him focus only on the apparent heart attack. I thought about that night 3 years ago. I'd been in the city, working late on a story, when Richard called to tell me my mother had been found dead in her bedroom. He'd sounded so shaken, so grief-stricken. Marcus had comforted me at the funeral, holding me while I cried for the mother I thought had died of natural causes. All this time, Marcus had been hugging me, consoling me, knowing that he had killed her with his own hands. How do you know all this now? I asked. Because we exhumed your mother's body last week. The new autopsy confirmed everything your mother suspected and more. The idea that my mother's body had been disturbed, that she'd had to be exhumed to prove her own murder, was almost too much to bear. But I forced myself to focus on what mattered, justice. What does this mean for the case? It means we have Richard dead to rights for first-degree murder. And Marcus is looking at the same charge. Will they plead guilty? Walsh shook his head. Richard's maintaining his innocence. Claims your mother was mentally unstable, that she fabricated all the evidence against him. Marcus is singing a different tune. What do you mean? Marcus wants to make a deal. He's willing to testify against Richard in exchange for a reduced sentence. I felt a familiar surge of anger. Even now, even facing life in prison, Marcus was looking for the easy way out. What kind of deal? 25 to life instead of life without parole. He'd have to allocate to all the murders, provide details about how they were committed, and testify fully about Richard's role in planning them. And you're considering this? Emily, I want to see Richard Richardson convicted more than anything. But without Marcus's testimony, there's a chance Richard could beat the murder charges. His lawyers are good, and they're claiming that all the evidence was fabricated by your mentally ill mother. The thought of Richard walking free was unbearable. But the thought of Marcus getting a reduced sentence for killing my mother was almost as bad. What would you do? I asked. If it was your mother? Walsh was quiet for a long moment. I'd want justice for all the victims. And sometimes justice means making deals with monsters to catch bigger monsters. 6 months after that night in the woods, I found myself sitting in a courtroom watching Richard Richardson's murder trial begin. The media attention had only intensified as more details emerged about the scope of his crimes. Cable news shows called it the Richardson family murders, and true crime podcasters dissected every piece of evidence with morbid fascination. But for me, it wasn't entertainment. It was justice for my mother and the other victims Richard had silenced over the years. Marcus had ultimately taken the plea deal, agreeing to testify against Richard in exchange for 25 years to life. I'd wrestled with the decision for weeks, but ultimately I'd told Prosecutor Walsh to accept it. The evidence against Richard was strong, but not airtight. We needed Marcus's testimony to ensure conviction. Watching Marcus walk into the courtroom to testify was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by his orange jumpsuit and shackles. But when his eyes met mine across the courtroom, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine remorse. His testimony was devastating. Richard told me that Emily's mother had become a problem. Marcus said from the witness stand, his voice barely above a whisper. She'd found out about the business issues, the missing money, and she was threatening to go to the authorities. "What did Richard ask you to do about this problem?" Prosecutor Walsh asked. "He said we needed to take care of it before she could destroy our family." "Take care of it how?" Marcus was quiet for so long that the judge prompted him to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but hollow. He said we had to kill her. The courtroom was dead silent as Marcus described how Richard had planned my mother's murder with clinical precision. The digitalis obtained from his father's old medication, the timing calculated to make her death look like a natural heart attack, the backup plan with potassium chloride in case the poison didn't work fast enough. Who administered the digitalis? Walsh asked. Richard did. He'd been putting small amounts in her coffee for about a week, just enough to weaken her heart without causing immediate symptoms. And the potassium chloride? Marcus's voice broke slightly. I did. Richard called me when she wasn't dying fast enough from the digitalis. He said we couldn't wait any longer, that we had to finish it. Did Sarah Matthews resist? She woke up while I was injecting her. She tried to fight, tried to scream, but she was too weak from the poison. She looked at me. Marcus stopped, unable to continue. What did she do when she looked at you? She said my name. She said, "Marcus, please." Like she couldn't believe I would hurt her. I had to leave the courtroom during that part of his testimony. The image of my mother, weakened and dying, pleading with the boy she'd helped raise, was more than I could bear. But Marcus's testimony didn't just cover my mother's murder. Over 3 days on the witness stand, he detailed 5 other killings that Richard had ordered or planned over the past 15 years. David Chun, the construction worker who died in the accidental brake failure. Marcus had cut the brake lines himself on Richard's instructions. Margaret Foster, the accountant who discovered the embezzlement. Marcus had injected her with a lethal dose of heroin while she was unconscious, making her death look like an overdose. Robert Martinez, a business partner who'd threatened to expose Richard's bid-rigging scheme. Marcus had pushed him off a scaffolding at a construction site, making it look like an industrial accident. Dr. James Hendricks, the medical examiner who'd falsified my mother's autopsy report. When Hendricks got greedy and demanded more money to keep quiet, Richard had Marcus stage a home invasion that ended with the doctor's death. And finally, Patricia Williams, Richard's first wife and Marcus's biological mother. The woman whose death 20 years ago had made Richard a wealthy widower and allowed him to start his criminal empire. She was going to divorce him, Marcus testified. She'd found out about his affairs, his gambling debts, and she was going to take half of everything. Richard couldn't let that happen. How did Patricia Williams die? House fire. Richard paid someone to make it look like an electrical problem, but he planned the whole thing. I was only 8, but I remember him telling me that sometimes good people have to do bad things to protect their families. The defense attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Jennifer Hayes, tried to discredit Marcus's testimony by pointing out his obvious bias and his plea agreement. But the physical evidence backed up everything he said. DNA evidence, financial records, witness testimony from people who'd seen Marcus near the crime scenes. It all painted a picture of systematic murder orchestrated by Richard and carried out by his loyal stepson. When Richard finally took the stand in his own defense, he was a shadow of the commanding man who dominated my childhood. The months in jail had aged him dramatically, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the defeated slump of his shoulders. His testimony was a masterclass in deflection and manipulation. He claimed that Marcus was a troubled young man who'd committed these crimes on his own initiative, hoping to please a father figure. He portrayed my mother as mentally unstable, suggested she'd fabricated evidence against him in a delusional attempt to destroy his reputation. Sarah was a wonderful woman, he said, tears in his eyes, but she'd been struggling with depression and paranoia since her parents' deaths. I tried to get her help, but she refused treatment. I think she convinced herself that I was the source of all her problems. It was a convincing performance, and I could see some jury members nodding along. But Prosecutor Walsh was ready for Richard's lies. "Mr. Richardson," Walsh said during cross-examination, "if your wife was mentally unstable and fabricating evidence against you, how do you explain the fact that Marcus Richardson has confessed to murders that your wife documented before her death?" Marcus is clearly disturbed. He's saying whatever he thinks will get him a lighter sentence. "So, your position is that your mentally ill wife somehow predicted exactly which crimes your disturbed stepson would later confess to?" Richard's composure cracked slightly. That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying, sir? Are you claiming that your wife somehow forced Marcus to commit murders to make her fabricated evidence look real?" "Objection," defense attorney Hayes called out. "Argumentative." Sustained, the judge ruled, but the damage was done. The absurdity of Richard's position was clear to everyone in the courtroom. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the front row where Richard could see me. I wanted him to face what he'd done, to see the daughter of the woman he'd murdered bearing witness to his crimes. When the jury returned after 2 days of deliberation, their verdict was swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder in the deaths of Sarah Matthews, Patricia Williams, David Chun, Margaret Foster, Robert Martinez, and Dr. James Hendricks. Conspiracy to commit murder in the planned death of Emily Matthews. Fraud, embezzlement, racketeering, and a dozen other charges that would ensure Richard Richardson never saw freedom again. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 150 years for the other charges. As the bailiffs led Richard away in shackles, he turned to look at me one last time. There was no remorse in his eyes, no acknowledgement of the lives he'd destroyed. There was only cold hatred for the stepdaughter who'd refused to disappear quietly. I stared back at him until he was gone, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. That was 2 years ago. As I sit here now, recording this story in the home office of the house my mother left me, I can finally say that justice has been served. Marcus is serving his sentence at a medium-security facility upstate. He's eligible for parole in 20 years, assuming he lives that long. Prison hasn't been kind to him. I've heard from his lawyer that he's been attacked twice by other inmates who don't appreciate child killers and cop killers. I don't visit him. I don't write to him. When he sends me letters, and he does regularly, I throw them away unopened. Some might say that's cruel, but I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who destroy your life. It's something you give when you're ready, if you're ever ready. Richard died in prison 8 months ago. Heart attack, the warden said. Natural causes, though I've wondered if someone finally gave him a taste of his own medicine. I didn't attend his funeral. I heard it was a small affair, just a few distant relatives who still believed his claims of innocence. The house where I grew up has been sold. I couldn't bear to live there, couldn't bear to walk past the woods where I almost died. Instead, I bought a small cottage on the other side of town, close enough to visit my mother's grave but far enough from the memories that haunted that property. My mother's real will, the one Richard had hidden, left me everything, her inheritance from her parents, plus the life insurance money that Marcus was supposed to collect after my death. It's enough money to ensure I'll never have to worry about financial security again. But more importantly, it's given me the freedom to pursue the work that matters to me. I started the Sarah Matthews Foundation 6 months after the trial ended. We investigate cold cases involving suspicious deaths, particularly cases where the victims were whistleblowers or people who'd threatened powerful interests. We work with law enforcement, provide resources for families who can't afford private investigators, and advocate for stronger protections for people who speak truth to power. So far, we've helped solve 12 cases. 12 families who finally have answers. 12 killers who thought they'd gotten away with murder. The foundation also provides support for children who've lost parents to violence, particularly children who've been failed by the system designed to protect them. I know what it's like to grow up feeling invisible, feeling like your pain doesn't matter because you're not someone's real child. We make sure those children know they matter. We make sure they're seen. I still work as a journalist, but now I focus exclusively on investigative pieces about corporate crime and corruption. My editor jokes that I have a sixth sense for sniffing out cover-ups and conspiracies. If only she knew how I developed that particular skill. The story of my mother's murder and Richard's criminal empire became the subject of my first book, published last year. The Golden Child, A Daughter's Search for Justice, spent 14 weeks on the bestseller list and was optioned for a documentary series. I donate all the proceeds to the foundation. People often ask me if I'm angry, if I'm bitter about the 18 years I spent believing I was unwanted, unloved, not good enough for a family that was planning to kill me. The truth is, I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires energy I'd rather spend on building something positive from the ashes of my old life. But I am changed. The naive girl who used to desperately seek approval from people who saw her as expendable is gone. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who trusts her instincts, who refuses to accept easy answers when something feels wrong. I'm dating someone now, a detective named Sarah, who worked on one of our foundation cases. She's kind and patient and understands that some conversations are still difficult for me. She doesn't push when I wake up from nightmares about that night in the woods. She just holds me until the fear passes. Yesterday was the 3rd anniversary of my mother's murder. I spent the morning at her grave, telling her about the foundation, about the cases we've solved, about the children we've helped. I told her about Sarah, about the book, about the life I'm building from the truth she died to protect. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like she could hear me. The Golden Child turned out to be nothing but fool's gold, shiny on the surface, but worthless underneath. The real treasure was the strength my mother passed down to me, the determination to keep digging until the truth comes to light. Richard thought he could make me disappear. Marcus thought I would be too weak to fight back. They both underestimated the power of a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain by refusing to stay silent. They thought they knew me. They thought they could predict my reactions, control my choices, dictate my future. They were wrong. My name is Emily Matthews. I'm the daughter of Sarah Matthews, a woman who died protecting me from people who wanted to erase us both from history. I am not erased. I am not forgotten. I am not going anywhere. And neither is the truth.